Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today, and I really mean that. I mean it every day. But we have fascinating interviews with Michael Shellenberger, one of my favorite guests, also Senator Rand Paul to talk about his clash with Trump over tariffs, and Faiz Shakir, one of your ideological fellow travelers, former Bernie Sanders campaign director, who we're going to talk to about really exciting stuff.
Yes, he is one of my ideological fellow travelers, but we're all Americans and we need to understand what's going on in this country. A lot is going on. Last night was a big night. I'm sure you'll have some things to brag about. I'll have some things to be excited about. So let's get started. What's on your radar?
Happy to tell you, Marianne. Nina Jankowicz, a name our viewers might recall, is the former director of the Department of Homeland Security's Disinformation Governance Board, an entity that purported to advise the Biden administration on how best to counter online misinformation, but was shuttered after drawing the ire of conservatives and libertarians like myself. Like so many other purported disinfo experts, Jankowicz's track record of identifying actual lies is decidedly mixed. She had dutifully joined the intelligence community and much of the mainstream media, for instance, in wrongly asserting that the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story was disinformation peddled by Russia. Now, she personally expressed the view that the straightforward explanation, Hunter Biden left his laptop at a repair shop, was a fairy tale. Oopsies. But like so many other former government intelligence officials who were fundamentally wrong about pivotal issues pertaining to their area of expertise, Jankowicz is fated to fall upward. She is now the president of the Sunlight Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting transparency, though the group does not disclose its source of funding. That intriguing policy, some would say execrable hypocrisy, was noted by Representative Michael Baumgardner during a fiery congressional subcommittee hearing on Tuesday. Jankowicz testified alongside one of her most ardent critics, my friend, the independent journalist Matt Taibbi, whose work exposing the federal government's efforts to compel social media companies to censor contrarian speech was a major driver of negative attention to projects like the Disinformation Governance Board. Taibbi's Twitter files, as well as similar projects like my own Facebook files, demonstrated that aggressive moderation of dissident opinions online was not a choice freely made by social media companies. It was forced on them by government agents who were themselves misinformed about the facts.
To start, Ms. Jankowicz, your organization, the American Sunlight Project, claims to have a commitment to transparency and apparently does not extend to disclosing its donors. Has the American Sunlight Project received funding either directly or indirectly from the George Soros or his foundations, including the Open Society Foundation?
Thank you, Congressman. I've received a lot of threats for speaking out, and so I've decided that we are going to abide by the rules that other 501c4s in our country abide by, and we are not required to disclose our donors, small or large, because I frankly don't want them to be threatened the way that I have been.
So sunlight for other people, but not for your donors.
I guess transparency is good for you, not for Nina Jankowicz. Now, as you just heard, she defended the Sunlight Foundation's lack of transparency on grounds that she has personally faced bullying as a result of her anti-disinfo advocacy, and she wished to spare her backers from such a fate. She also tore into Taibbi, accusing him of failing to understand the implications of the information he uncovered and the social media censorship stories he had reported on. She said, quote, Mr. Taibbi said when he was first searching through the so-called Twitter files, he didn't know what he was looking at. Well, he still doesn't. Everything looks like a conspiracy when you don't know how anything works, end quote. That's a bold claim from someone who bought into a conspiracy theory about the Biden laptop's provenance. In any case, Jankowicz proceeded to flatly assert that the State Department's Global Engagement Center, charged with countering foreign propaganda, was never engaged in anything approaching censorship. This claim is abjectly false and collapses under scrutiny. Let's watch some of her testimony and then I'll explain.
Something I think the Republicans on this committee would be very interested in, tracking and countering Chinese state propaganda targeting Americans. Now, I used to manage State Department grants early in my career. I know that that is a huge fiduciary responsibility. You have to account for every single penny that you're spending on travel, on staff time, on supplies, and you have to do it multiple times a year. So for folks to sit here and say that grants dedicated to countering CCP propaganda were somehow spent on conservative blacklists is just ridiculous. And I'll also add that that is those organizations' speech to be able to do research and categorize news sites as they see fit. A letter sent to the Senate last week shows that actually a lot of conservative organizations, including the Heritage Foundation, the Wall Street Journal, Reason, Cato Institute, and the Washington Free Beacon, all received great ratings by NewsGuard, while the Daily Kos only got a 45 out of 100.
I want to dig a little deeper here. Now, at issue are two independent anti-disinfo organizations, NewsGuard and the Global Disinformation Index, that received funding from the State Department. In her testimony, Jankowicz acknowledged that these organizations were federally funded, although she defended the grants as being focused on combating Chinese government propaganda rather than encouraging censorship of American media entities. All right, we'll return to that in a minute. Jankowicz subsequently took issue with the idea that NewsGuard was biased against right-leaning news sources, noting that several, quote, conservative organizations, including the Wall Street Journal, the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, and Reason, where I also work, had received favorable evaluations. Neither Reason nor Cato identify themselves as conservative, of course. Alas, this is precisely the sort of sloppiness one has by now come to expect from the anti-disinfo experts. It's true, in any case, that NewsGuard favorably evaluated Reason, my other employer, but the Global Disinformation Index, the GDI, is another matter entirely. This organization, a British nonprofit backed by the State Department, listed Reason as one of the 10 riskiest news outlets, warned advertisers against appearing on their website. GDI's stated rationale for this purported danger was inscrutable. I tried to get to the bottom of it. They wouldn't talk to me about it. The disinfo cops accused us of having unclear authorship policies, which is simply not true. And Reason was far from the only disfavored news source. GDI targeted the New York Post, Real Clear Politics, the Daily Wire, the Blaze, the American Conservative, and the Washington Examiner. Now, the Examiner subsequently took a closer look at the GDI's operations and determined that its missives to advertisers to avoid risky libertarian and conservative news sites were partly based on the idea that we were promoting COVID-19 misinformation. Specifically, GDI was shaming these websites for including commentary that COVID-19 may have leaked from a Chinese lab. This theory, labeled a, quote, coronavirus conspiracy by GDI, is now, of course, determined by the FBI, CIA, and Energy Department to be the most plausible explanation for the pandemic's origins. Oopsies again. Wait a minute, though. Wasn't Jankowicz defending the State Department's decision to fund these anti-disinfo organizations on grounds that they were merely using those taxpayer dollars to counter Chinese government propaganda? Well, GDI tried to suppress the idea that COVID-19 could have emerged from a Chinese lab under lax safety conditions, a disaster that was subsequently hidden by Chinese officials. Given that millions of people died all over the world as a result of the pandemic, any organizations, let me be clear, running cover for the Chinese government on this topic is effectively complicit in the Chinese government's most essential propaganda campaign. So much for the State Department paying disinfo cops to counter foreign misinformation. When it came to COVID-19's origins, the GDI enforced the misinformation. And Jankowicz is still defending them. So I watched this hearing with great interest yesterday, Marianne, and this is a theme we've talked about on Rising quite a bit. But they say, oh yeah, we're not doing censorship, we're not funding censorship, we're funding countering of Chinese propaganda. They were actually funding the enforcement of Chinese propaganda because they were trying to get advertisers not to work with news websites that raise questions about the lab leak origin, among many other things. And this is my whole problem with this industry, Marianne. You and I disagree on things. We argue about it. We talk about it. That's how things should work. These disinfo people purport to be the referees. We know what's disinformation, and we're not going to allow that or discuss that. But they get it wrong just as much as anybody else.
Robby, I think that at the deepest level, this isn't even a right-left issue. The word that I think is most operative is not disinfo, but referee. Whether it's coming from the Republicans who are with this anti-DEI stuff, the president saying they want to rewrite what museums put in their exhibits, whether it has to do with them telling cultural institutions or universities or anything else, you can say this and you can't say that, or the things that you, I think, very rightfully pointed out. Whether it's coming from Democrats or Republicans, we have to be alert to it and not like it. The idea that any political sector would seek to engineer and to manipulate the dispersal of information itself is dangerous, and that's why I think this should be an American issue. This should be an ethical issue. This should not even be left-right. So if you call them out on the left, good for you, and I want to call them out on the right, as do others. It's dangerous. Americans, if we can't trust that we are getting proper information, then we can't do our best thinking, and we can't be the governance force of the country that the populace needs to be in a democracy.
I think I agree with that.
Good.
American taxpayers, I don't think, want their money being spent to encourage censorship in any direction. Do they want the government trying to micromanage the things you're talking about or the things I'm talking about? Of course not. And also the First Amendment is pretty clear that they shouldn't try to do that. So we need to leave each other alone in terms of policing each other's speech, have robust conversations, dialogues. I think it's fine and even cool to have Matt Taibbi and Nina Jankowicz, two people who could not be more radically different, in conversation with each other, arguing about it. But, you know, she made some pretty provocative claims there, and I think I was able to effectively pick them apart, but I'll let people be the judge of that.
Yeah, congratulations to you. I think, though, that this all gets down to ethics. I think that this country has lost some of these basic characterological commitments that are so important for right living, both as individuals and as a nation. We need to be ethical. Part of being ethical is you tell the truth and you don't try to mess it up and manipulate it so that other people will think what you want them to think. Not cool. Not cool. From the other side of the political spectrum.
Well, thank you very much. Like we said in the opening, some really great interviews coming up today. Faiz Shakir, Rand Paul, Michael Shellenberger. We can't wait to get to it. Also, lots more to discuss, including some election results from last night. Stay with us. More Rising right after this.
What happens when money can't buy happiness or a state Supreme Court seat? Just ask Elon Musk, who spent $25 million on the race, hoping to defeat liberals in Wisconsin.
Musk also showed up in Wisconsin Sunday night, donned a cheese head hat, and offered two allegedly random voters $1 million each just for showing up. Still, Susan Crawford won a 10-year term in Wisconsin over her GOP rival, Brad Schimmel. This win enables the left to maintain a 4-3 majority in the swing state. Let's listen to what Crawford had to say about her win.
As a little girl growing up in Chippewa Falls, I never could have imagined that I'd be taking on the richest man in the world. For justice in Wisconsin. And we won.
It was the first major battleground state election of President Donald Trump's second term. The race drew national attention. Many on the left took to X to taunt and poke at Elon Musk.
Still, Musk and Trump did not admit defeat and even claimed victory. Trump took to Truth Social and wrote, "Voter ID just approved in Wisconsin election. Democrats fought hard against this, presumably so they can cheat." Still, it's easier to crow about the wins in Florida. MAGA did retain the two seats vacated by Matt Gaetz and Mike Waltz of Signalgate fame. Steve Kornacki, who's known for his political predictions and analysis, posted, "Democrats will lose Florida 6, but will significantly reduce Trump's 30-point margin from last November." 3 of the 6 counties, the candidates won by 17, 15, and 11 respectively, but Trump won those areas in 2024 by 34, 28, and 32. So you must be relatively pleased about the Wisconsin result, Marianne?
I absolutely am, and a couple of things I want to say about that. First of all, the girls. Okay? Susan Crawford, the women are leading this thing among the Republicans as well as the Democrats. You know, we talked before when I was here about Lisa Murkowski. Now you've got Anna Paulina Luna, who's standing up to Mike Johnson in the House. So I think
that's on the proxy voting
and SAVE Act, and yes, absolutely, so that women can have children. For a woman who is a congresswoman to have a child, and then she's like halfway or all the way across the country, has to go back to make a vote. But then Johnson says that's unconstitutional, but that's ridiculous because women weren't granted voting rights when the Constitution was written. So I think on both the left and the right, women are leading the charge against the neo-fascist conservative, not conservative, they're actually not conservative, but extremist views that are slamming down on the rooftop of democracy. That's number one. So, yay, you go girl, Susan Crawford. I forget the other thing I was going to say.
Well,
when I said there were, about Florida. Yes. I say, yes, we lost Florida. But as we already pointed out, we lost Florida by so much less. So the Democrats are coming back. Let us have this moment, okay? Just let us have this moment.
fine.
You guys have everything. Today's a good day for Democrats, and let us celebrate.
Here's the thing.
Be magnanimous, Robby, and say, okay, you guys get today.
Sure. Here's the thing I would say about the margin for the wins in Florida being a little bit lower. This is an issue the Republican Party is going to have to confront, that Trump is as much as he fires up and outrages Democrats, the left, etc., Trump is a draw for Republican voters. Republicans now have the situation that Democrats used to have, where Democrats wanted, everybody and their grandmothers show up to vote. The people are Democrats, etc. Republicans wanted elections at special time where only affluent people who don't absolutely have to go into the office anyway because they're affluent can show up to it. Then we'll have Republicans win. Now it's more the opposite problem now. The most motivated people, the Democrats, they're going to show up on days, not regularly scheduled election days, whereas the Republicans need the draw of Trump to get their entire movement into the ballot box. So if you have elections that are not on the regularly scheduled election day in November, Republicans will have a problem. So I'm not surprised at all that the margins were lower for Republicans, because not all their voters came out because Trump was not literally on the ballot. That's going to be a problem because, despite conservative, some like Steve Bannon's hopes and liberal fears, Trump is not going to be on the ballot in 4 years. So Republicans are going to have to deal with that one. Now I want to talk about the Elon Musk of it all. I saw a lot of liberals, in my view, making Elon Musk the focus of this defeat and saying, we can defeat him, yay, hooray, and all of that. I'm a little skeptical. That sounds like a national narrative to me being projected onto what is a swing state. I had to remind people that Trump won this state by less than 1 point. It was won by Joe Biden the last time around. It has a Democratic governor. One of its senators is a Democrat. So it is not at all weird to me or needs explanation that the Democrats won this. I don't know that it's so much a blow to Republican success. Actually, it's a reminder that, and you and I argue about this all the time, you actually can't just buy an election. No matter how many millions of dollars Elon spends, you can't change people's votes. And so money's not everything. And despite spending tons of money, it didn't matter. So I think
that's not just an artificially created narrative. That's very true and very important. When you say people see it as Wisconsin having beaten back Musk, what they beat back was his money. What they beat back was his obvious effort to buy this race. And that's an American thing going on, I hope. That even relates to what Faiz was saying. The Americans are realizing on both left and right, I think, that the idea that there should be a billionaire class who have so much money that with that money they can engineer American politics is absolutely a death blow to our democracy.
What I'm saying is they can't engineer American politics.
That's my point. But they have been in too many cases, both on the left and the right. Huge economic, financially backed forces have had such an undue influence on Congress for decades now that they've turned Washington into a system of legalized bribery. And the Trump-Musk forces are just the sort of climactic manifestation of this level of corruption. And people have had it on both the left and the right. But I think that there's something going on if you look back at what's happening in Congress right now. And I think when Rand Paul is here, when we talk about this a little bit later in the show, his stand against the tariffs, there are some Republicans now who are standing up, not just the women, as I mentioned before, but some of your favorites, such as Massey and Paul, and I think there will be others. Some today, Republicans were talking about, hey, you're going too far and too cruelly on some of this immigration stuff. They know, based on the anger at their own town halls, the fact that in many places they can't even have them, the anger is so high. So even among the Republicans, I think there's starting to be signs in Congress as well that this thing is moving too far, and we've got to head back to more reasonable common sense and loving
that's an
policies.
interesting perspective. I agree that I think it's good to have healthy debate within the coalition, and there is debate within the Republican coalition about how best to implement the America First foreign policy that Trump ran on, the American First domestic policy, and what policies align with that. You saw that we discussed this ad nauseum, so I don't want to dwell on it, but the debate even within the Signalgate chat about whether bombing Yemen was even a good idea, that between J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth, that it's very healthy. So there are differences of opinion on foreign policy, on what level of student immigration we want, or with the H-1B visa fight we had a couple weeks ago that was very interesting. So I see that as a healthy tendency in the Republican Party, that you have these different perspectives, arguing sometimes in a really strident way, because Donald Trump likes to call out people who are disagreeing with him. But I see that as healthy. Do you think that's happening on the Democratic side, though?
Absolutely, it's happening on the Democratic side, between people who feel that the Democrats need to hew a more moderate line versus those who feel that economic populism is absolutely the way to go, which I do believe, as we were talking about before, is the way forward for America. Now, as far as there being within either party healthy debate is, of course, a good thing. Whether it's Republicans or Democrats. However, I think what's been happening previously, despite what you saw in that Signalgate chat, is that there has been this almost militaristic falling in line with whatever Trump wanted. And that's the dam that I feel is starting to break, and will be healthy for your party and much, much better for America.
Wasn't all bad news, though, even in Wisconsin, obviously, for Republicans, the voter ID provision passing. What's your quick take on that before we move on?
I'm mixed. I think some of it is very sinister, because I think that they are accusing Democrats of doing things that we are not doing, trying to get people who are not citizens to vote. And actually it will have an effect of making it harder for many people to vote who simply, let's say, older people living in rural communities, et cetera. But in general, you can have that one. As long as we got that Susan Crawford on the Supreme Court, that's the bigger win. We're just taking it to that.
I'm reading the demographic data and voter trends, and my secret belief that I'm always trying to discreetly tell Republicans is, I think if more non-citizens voted, Republicans would do better. I think they're more likely to be Trump voters now, is where we're getting to. Not that should matter. It's just funny that how obsessed Republican Party is with the who votes issue, when having more people vote now would be beneficial for Trump, as far as I can tell. But we should leave it there.
No one knows.
Lots more.
No one knows that.
Maybe no one knows for sure, but sure were a lot of, he got votes from, he increased his voter share among Haitians, despite everything.
Come on. When this came up, this whole thing about voter fraud, and when Trump started making it like it was a big deal, this was all a made-up fiction.
I agree.
There was a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of evidence that there was anything like voter fraud. This
saying.
is a made-up drama, a made-up story. Donald Trump and all of his minions started repeating it, and that's how politics is.
Yet I got mailed the previous tenant of my apartment's.
What?
I got mailed.
Yeah, you
the
did tell me
previous
that.
tenant's
That was
ballot.
bad. That was bad.
I didn't vote twice, though.
That which is incorrect should not be displayed by either party.
That's just fine. All right, up next, Trump is continuing to target the Ivy League. We'll discuss. It's a billion-dollar battle. The Trump administration is continuing to crack down on Ivy League universities.
They say it's a crackdown against anti-Semitism, but many are beginning to wonder if the administration is using anti-Semitism as a cudgel and as a way to bring down the elite universities, bring them to their knees. Their latest target? Harvard. The administration says Harvard hasn't done enough to curb anti-Semitism. And as a result, the Trump administration is reviewing around $9 billion in federal grants and contracts to Harvard.
Josh Greenbaum of the General Services Administration said in a statement, quote, "While Harvard's recent actions to curb institutionalized anti-Semitism, though long overdue, are welcome, there is much more that the university must do to retain the privilege of receiving federal taxpayers' hard-earned dollars. This administration has proven we will take swift action to hold institutions accountable if they allow anti-Semitism to fester. We will not hesitate to act if Harvard fails to do so."
Harvard's president, Alan Garber, told the university's community that they were not perfect. Garber said, however, they would give the federal government details on their efforts to curb anti-Semitism and future plans. Garber continued. If this funding is stopped, it will halt life-saving research and imperil important scientific research and innovation.
Then there's Columbia University. It was the heart of the pro-Palestinian protests last year. The Trump administration stripped the university of $400 million of federal funding after its investigation. In an effort to try to recover that money, Columbia agreed to certain concessions. Columbia's former intern, President Katrina Armstrong, said that the university would change up its protest rules, provide new oversight of their Middle East Studies department, and strengthen its campus security. Some faculty members were upset, and a week after Armstrong made the concessions, the university announced she was stepping down.
Columbia's new president, Claire Shipman, who was named on Friday night, is now under fire from Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. In 2023, Shipman sent a text to Columbia's then-president, Nimat Shafik, and said that the anti-Semitism hearings in Congress were, quote-unquote, Capitol Hill nonsense. Here's Stefanik on Fox News this Sunday.
The fact that we're on the third Columbia University president, and this one, let's be honest, Maria, is not going to last as well. It's already come out that she has criticized and belittled the House investigation and the accountability measures and has failed to protect Jewish students.
I believe she said the hearings on anti-Semitism is Capitol Hill nonsense.
Exactly. That is what this latest Columbia University president said. That's why it's untenable for her to be in this position. And I think it is only going to be a matter of weeks before she is forced to step down as well.
4 children of Columbia's first Jewish president, Michael Shellenberger, are speaking out. In a letter to the editor of the Washington Post, Shellenberger's children write, "What Trump did to Columbia and Paul Weiss is a warning to all of us. We believe that if he were alive today, he would be disgusted by the government's coercion of Columbia, purportedly in the name of our religion. We do not believe President Donald Trump is sincere about protecting Jews from anti-Semitism."
Then there's the University of Pennsylvania. The Trump administration said in March that it was stopping $175 million in federal funding to the university over its transgender athlete policy. Education Secretary Linda McMahon wrote on X, "Harvard has served as a symbol of the American dream for generations. It must restore itself to a campus dedicated to academic excellence and truth-seeking where all students feel safe. We mean business." Hedge fund manager Bill Ackman wrote, "It's remarkable how Harvard did not take these many warnings it received seriously." So here we are.
Oh, wow. Well, you know, Pam Bondi is getting rid of the department that had to do with civil rights. And I think that that's where this should have belonged. The idea that any group of people are experiencing institutional racism, and anti-Semitism is a form of racism, should have been handled. And it should have been handled on that level, and it should have been handled by the university. But I agree with the children of the former and late Jewish president of Columbia and saying this is all a ruse. Trump taking these unbelievable strong measures against Columbia, against Harvard, in the name of anti-Semitism. I'll tell you, as a Jew, I don't buy it. And that's not to say I don't think that there was some anti-Semitism there, and it's not to say I don't think that there were some measures that needed to be taken. But as the gentleman from Columbia said, or Harvard, I can't remember which, this is medical research that would be stopped if these funds were withheld. This is stuff that's very, very important to people's lives. And I will say one more thing. This will only increase anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is inside the mind and the heart. You can't just fight it with external measures. And I think that this will make it a less, at least emotionally and psychologically, safe place, these campuses for Jewish students. And I'm afraid that it will actually inspire greater acts of anti-Semitism off campus. So don't do that kind of stuff in our name, Mr. President, because we know better. We've been through this for thousands of years. We kind of know what works and what doesn't work, and what you're doing is not what works.
Well, on the issue of policing anti-Semitism, I largely agree with you. I think certainly genuine racial harassment, targeted racial harassment, is illegal, is a violation of university policies, is not a protected category under free speech. They should take that seriously, certainly. There have been some instances of that. There's also been some things that were purported to be that are actually just free expression and should not be policed. So on that part of this, we agree. Where I don't think we agree as much is that I'm not eager to send millions of billions of dollars to elite educational institutions that are themselves very wealthy. And also, and this is important to note, there is nothing new about elite universities folding to federal pressure. For 8 years, the Obama administration, and I covered this before, this was before I was more of a TV figure, I was mostly a higher education reporter, I followed the dictates of the Obama administration to campuses. Their education department, their Office for Civil Rights, sent letters to universities saying it's very similar setup. It wasn't about anti-Semitic speech. It was about gender-based harassment under Title IX. They said your campus is an unsafe place for women because you don't have these specific adjudication policies for sexual misconduct. This very much impacted speech. People, they wanted like sexist jokes to be purged from campuses. It sounds like a joke, but they got letters from the Office for Civil Rights. Catherine Yeaman was the figure in charge of the office. I wrote about this constantly. There was not a single campus anywhere that said this is a violation of our autonomy and this is attacking our due process and free speech policies. Every single one of them folded at the Obama administration's will to crush free expression on campus. There were professors who spoke up against it. I talked to tons of progressive, leftist, ACLU-type professors who are saying these policies that the Obama administration is pushing on us are anathema to everything we stand for. So that's a long way of saying there is nothing new here, and if you are reliant on federal funding, you will be pushed around by the federal government, and that's not a good thing, which is why I want to separate these institutions from federal funding.
One of the things that you just pointed out, the story you pointed out, Obama did not withhold millions of dollars. Obama was not withholding.
No, he did. No, he did. No, they did. They said, do these things or we will cut your funding.
Well, that's called a warning.
That's exactly what Trump's doing. We're going to cut your funding unless you do it's the exact same thing.
No, actually it said we are doing that unless you actually make these changes. And the changes, let's talk about the changes at, let's say, Columbia. These are very, very serious moves that they're making. Number one, the guards will be able to arrest people, which I think is very dangerous for a college campus. And they're actually taking into academic receivership the Middle East Studies Department, Asian Studies Department, and Black Studies Department. This is a violation of academic freedom. And I do not believe that Columbia University should have caved any more than I believe Paul Weiss Law Firm should have caved. These people must hold the line. This is called when authoritarianism
they shouldn't cave either, but their knees are weak. They always cave.
Pardon?
Their knees are weak. They always cave.
Well, they should not cave. And one of the things I don't understand is if Columbia, which it does, has a $14 billion endowment, that $400 million doesn't make sense.
It's greedy. They want every penny.
Well, some Columbia alumni would make up that shortfall. I think we're living at a time, for millions of us, I know you don't see it this way, millions of us believe that this is an authoritarian threat that we're talking about in front of us. When an administration is saying we're going to control what happens in universities, we're going to control what happens in cultural institutions, we're going to control what happens in museums, we're going to control what happens in these different sectors of life that the government, and I would think conservatives would agree, should not have their hands in. We have got to not cave. People have got to stop caving. And a very dangerous move is when people start, it's a phrase, obedience in advance. Some of these law firms are actually having meetings with the administration before the administration is even coming after them. So for all of us who believe that we have to hold the line, Columbia hold the line, Harvard hold the line, we must not allow the abuse of power that is being exercised by this administration to affect our lives or our institutions the way it is.
Again, it's not that I particularly disagree that this is an abuse of power, but why was it not fascism? Why was it not being worked up about when the Obama and Biden administrations, both of them, again, sent directives to K through 12 schools saying, here is what your disciplinary policy should be. We think there's too much of a disparate impact on different races, so we want different disciplinary policies, or you're losing funding. Or when they said about gender accommodation policies, here is the, you got to have everybody in the same facilities, and if you don't like that, too bad, we're going to cut your funding. Like, this is something Democratic leadership did. Was that fascist? Was that a takeover?
I think the Trump administration making comments about anti-Semitism on these campuses was itself appropriate. I'm just saying that they're going so far. It so far exceeds what the mistake was, what the sin, as it were, of the university was. That's all I'm saying. Listen, whether we're on the left or the right, part of being a good citizen is to have a healthy skepticism towards government overreach, no matter where it comes from. I believe that it is, whether it's coming from Obama or from Trump. I don't have a problem with the government saying, hey, you're not being fair to Jews, you're not being fair to blacks, you're not being fair to transgender, you're not being fair to gay, you're not being fair to women. That, I don't have a problem with it. But when they say, and we're going to take out entire departments, and I don't believe it. And the reason I don't believe it is because what they're really trying to do, once again, this anti-Semitism thing is being used as a cover. What they really don't like is the academic freedom itself, because academic freedom in this country means we are going to talk the truth about America's history. We are going to have some uncomfortable conversations. We aren't going to always say things or do things or teach to our children things that one party or another doesn't like. It's the control they're seeking to exercise on what law firms do, on what universities do.
I
that
spoke,
simply must be stopped by both people on the left and the right.
2 weeks ago, I was invited to a college in Michigan. I'm from Michigan, and I know about the college, but I never visited it before, Hillsdale College, which does not receive any federal funding and thus is not on the hook for having to do anything the federal government wants. They are free to set any of their own policies. They are totally immune from influence. It was one of the most interesting campuses I've been to in terms of how bright and engaging the students were. They were all, I asked them, like, is there a dress code? Everyone dresses so snappy and in a bright and inviting and intellectually curious way. No, that's just the kind of students they foster there. I'm not, by the way, this is not some advertisement. I'm not being paid to say this. I was just blown away by how, well, I was just impressed by how it was like a little Hogwarts or something. How, and I talked with a lot of the students, how interesting they were. That's just to say that there are some good things about weaning yourself off the grain dole.
Listen, I don't disagree with that. However, Hillsdale College in Michigan does not have huge scientific research centers or huge hospitals. I mean, let's be real here. So the gentleman who was talking from either Columbia or Harvard about what this money would mean if it were taken away is a very serious conversation. And of course, these government grants, when you say the government shouldn't be funding this, a lot of the research that is done via government funding is research that would not be done by the private sector.
Well, we'd have to have a longer argument about that.
Oh, let's do any time, because if you have a medicine that is needed for a small portion of the population, a big pharmaceutical company would say, well, it's not worth it profit-making wise. It's not good business for us to put our money into researching for that. But those people are Americans. That condition affects the lives of Americans, so it is absolutely appropriate that government funding be used for that, and a lot of the research is done at universities. I think the Republicans need to stop lying about what that money is being used for in so many cases.
I don't agree with that at all, but we do have to wrap. Up next, we'll speak to an advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders about the Democratic Party's future. Stay tuned. Democrats have been soul-searching after their 2024 election losses. Should they shift to the center, become more woke, stay the same, move to the left? Depends on who you ask. Here's Minnesota Governor, former vice presidential candidate Tim Walz last week.
And our culture proves that our strength is our diversity. We've been talking about this for years as a country of immigrants, and we let them define the issue on immigration. We let them define the issue on DEI, and we let them define what woke is. We got ourselves in this mess because we weren't bold enough to stand up and say, you damn right we're proud of these policies. We're going to put them in, and we're going to execute them.
Then there's the New York Times. The editorial board wrote an article titled, "The Democrats are in denial about 2024. The board writes, Democrats should recognize that the party moved too far left on social issues after Barack Obama left office in 2017. The old video clips of Ms. Harris that the Trump campaign gleefully replayed last year on decriminalizing the border and government-funded gender transition surgery for prisoners highlighted the problem."
Then you have Senator Cory Booker. He spoke on the Senate floor for more than 25 hours to protest President Trump's policies. Here's a clip.
The Trump administration and Republicans in Congress are right now, they are trying to gut Medicaid and Medicare programs on which nearly a third of our country rely, all to pay for those tax cuts. They're also dismantling the very institutions meant to safeguard our nation's health and well-being. That's why I'm going to stand here and explain to people what's going on and how our health care programs are at risk and being undermined. This is about right or wrong. It is wrong to take away health care for millions of people.
Bernie Sanders is currently on his Fighting Oligarchy tour, where he's speaking out against Trump and Musk initiatives. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez joined him on a couple of stops, and they're reportedly aiming to add more of them. Faiz Shakir is senior advisor to Bernie Sanders. He joins us now to discuss what he's seen and heard on Sanders' tour, what Democrats can do to recoup their losses. Faiz, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Marianne. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. Democrats had a good night last night between Booker, I thought very strong showing there on the Senate floor, and then, of course, the wonderful win in Wisconsin. Hopefully the tide is turning, and I think to the extent to which it is, a lot of this energy was activated by the tour that, of course, you have managed and been on with Senator Sanders. Tell us about it. Tell us about your experience, the energy that you saw out there, and particularly since you do work with unions, I'm interested in where you see unions fitting into all this. But let's start with the first foundational issue. What's happening? Do you feel the tide turning? And what was the energy that you saw on the road?
Marianne, this started, a couple of months ago. Senator Sanders had an instinct to say, let's get out in the country. Let's get outside of DC. While Musk is shutting down USAID, CFPB, and all these other government agencies, let's not stand in front of a government federal building. Let's go and talk to regular people who are being impacted. Because he had an instinct that people were ahead of the Democratic Party, were angrier than the politicians who were leading them were indicating. And so we first said, let's go to Omaha. That was Senator Sanders' decision. We wanted to go to a union hall, a laborers' town hall, to your point, Marianne, that we thought we'd get 700 people in a nice union hall gathering in Omaha. And within 12 hours of noticing that event, we had 2,000, 2,500. We were up to 4,000 by the end of it. We had to move venues. And that marked, we're in a moment. Senator Sanders was correct. And a lot of people were showing them that with their attendance, right? They know that Bernie Sanders is likely not going to run for president again. Why are so many people showing up? In Denver, we had 34,000. In Tucson, we had 23,000. And I think they're showing up because they're saying politicians are out of touch. They're not getting the class consciousness that we want. We see it in Bernie Sanders. We see somebody who understands the oligarchy, the problems of concentrated wealth and power, and we're voting with our attendance to tell people who want to listen, that's the direction we want to fight about.
It is clear to me as someone who's on the other side of things ideologically that Senator Sanders does have cross-party appeal, which confuses some people in the hierarchies of conservative media, Republican media, because they say, well, but his agenda, he's the most progressive or left-leaning of all, and yet he has the most crossover appeal. These, Trump, Sanders people. That's something AOC noticed when she was, even surveying people who voted for her, but also voted for Trump. You probably think that's, maybe that's entirely policy. I certainly think it's partly policy, and we can discuss that. It's also pretty clear to me, though, it's personality-based, and I think that is a challenge for the Democratic Party, that it is proven difficult to replicate the appeal of the personality appeal that Bernie Sanders clearly has with other people necessarily in the party. What do you think about that?
So, Robby, my reaction to that is a couple-fold here. That there's obviously integrity associated with Senator Sanders, and as you and Marianne were going through the introductions, you get a sense that a lot of Democrats put their finger up in the wind and say, "Hey, what should I do on this social issue, and what should I do on this racial justice issue?" Well, let's look at some polls, and that's never been the way Senator Sanders operates. It comes from a place of deeply felt conviction. For 40 years, people feel like, hey, rock in the sand. He knows where he stands, even on issues maybe I might disagree with him on. He's been there fighting a fight of integrity. But associated with that, Robby, and what you think about the kind of crossover appeal, I think has to do more so with his class consciousness. He's an iconoclast in that regard, has identified as one of his main things in life, that the concentration of wealth and power is to be abhorred and to be fought against, whether it's influencing corporate America unjustly, but also the political system. So that you see in Senator Sanders' person, 100% grassroots funded, taking on political corruption, calling for cutting the defense budget, auditing the Fed, things that have crossover appeal, and they don't come from a gamesmanship from him, a sense of real ideological integrity about a goal orientation. What do you want a government to do? This is where Medicare for All comes into play, a sense of a society that services people, not wealth. And that is how I think you get to the crossover appeal.
I think the elite in both parties are missing some very important points here, including the fact that a majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care. They want Medicare for all. They want tuition-free college and tech school. So once again, starting with Senator Sanders, and I think, by the way, in terms of what Robby was saying, it's not so much that the Democrats don't have anyone else as that there has been in the past, I do think that this will change now, but an elite establishment which has sought to de-amplify and disenfranchise and peripheralize any voices that really might have emerged with a similar kind of power. I think that will change now. So if we are seeing last night as a kind of turning of the tide, what do you, Faiz, being where you sit with unions, with Senator Sanders, what do you think is the most important thing for Democrats to do now going forward?
Well, I hope that, we tend to look at politics too often and too much in a left-right spectrum. And I understand, there is a left-right spectrum. So if Donald Trump is deporting undocumented immigrants unjustly, then of course there is a left value that says, hey, humans are humans and we shouldn't treat them unjustly just because of a status. And you get these left-right spectrums playing out on a lot of different issues. And what I would humbly suggest is the left-right dimension, while it is there, the most important prism to look at this current politics is to invert that left-right and look at it top versus bottom. And that's where people are. They're very upset, I think rightly, that too much wealth and power is dictating our politics. There's a hubris associated with that, obviously in the way in which Elon Musk conducts himself. It's a sense of like divine right of kings. I know best. I can press delete on a spreadsheet, ruin your life, doesn't even matter. Go tweet at me. That he doesn't care. And that kind of a hubris, that exploitation, that greed that's become associated with the billionaire class, associated with this middleman economy that we all hate, junk fees, exploitation, those kinds of things are now infecting us across the board. And people are looking for who stands up to power, who wants to do this, who wants to engage in that kind of a friction that's class-based, that services people. Senator Sanders, obviously, that gets to why he's iconoclastic in this regard and standing out from the Democratic pack, which is really kind of underperforming at the moment in terms of the brand. That said, people are looking for a fighter. They're looking for a political home. And I hope that people will embrace some of this populism, some of the desire to confront concentrations of wealth and power. That's where people are, and the Democratic Party has to catch up to that.
I will. I think you're so correct in pointing out that the major conversations we need to have must go past this right versus left continuum all the time. There's a new Americanism which is centered around economic populism that not only do we see in someone like Senator Sanders, but which you see coming up from the bottom of things more and more among Republicans too. Thomas Jefferson said the only safe repository for power in the United States is in the hands of the people, and that means all of the people. So thank you for helping to lead the charge. You're always welcome here. I want to hear what you have to say, and I listen to every word that you put out there, and I watch everything you do. So thank you so much.
Nice to meet you, Robby.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you. Up next, we'll talk to journalist Michael Shellenberger about his explosive new report on the FBI and Hunter Biden's laptop. Stay tuned. New Jersey Democratic Senator Cory Booker broke the record for the longest Senate speech in history. Booker stood on the floor for 25 hours and 5 minutes, where he focused on contesting President Trump's agenda. Let's listen to somewhat of what he had to say during his historic filibuster.
I rise with the intention of disrupting the normal business of the United States Senate for as long as I am physically able. People are saying this country once made itself the envy of the world because we invested in high-quality education for every child. I don't like what's going on with the end of the Department of Education. People are saying I worked harder than I ever have, but the prices on everything in my life are getting higher. People who are saying that the America I learned about in school, the one where people's rights are protected, the people are saying that why are we yet again going through another healthcare battle that threatens millions of people? The people are saying that I'm worried about the financial security and the future of my country.
Democrats, of course, celebrated his accomplishment. Here is Senator Chuck Schumer applauding Booker.
Would the senator yield for a question?
Chuck Schumer, it's the only time in my life I can tell you no.
I just want to tell you a question. Do you know you have just broken the record? Do you know how proud this caucus is of you? Do you know how proud America is of you?
Booker also discussed the economy.
He promised to lower your grocery prices, they're higher. He promised, I'll be a better steward of the economy. It's worse than we inherited. Over and over, he's breaking promises and doing outrageous things like disappearing people off of American streets, violating fundamental principles of this document, invoking the Alien Enemies Act from the 1700s that was last used to put Japanese Americans in internment camps. Do we see what's happening? How much is enough?
And lastly, here is more of Booker on President Trump and Elon Musk.
We have a president who's come in, and one of the first things he's done in 71 days is insinuate fear and insecurity about Social Security by threatening it, by telling lies about it, and by having somebody like Elon Musk calling it a Ponzi scheme, and that's why we get fear. And then they take a hatchet to the actual agency that undermines its ability to deliver service in a good way.
The senator who previously held the record before Booker was Strom Thurmond. In 1957, Thurmond filibustered against the Civil Rights Act. His speech lasted a total of 24 hours and 18 minutes. It's an ironic twist, considering Booker himself is on the opposite side of the civil rights spectrum. Here is Booker on MSNBC last night.
To be candid, Strom Thurmond's record always kind of just really irked me, that he would be the longest speech, that the longest speech on our great Senate floor was someone who was trying to stop people like me from being in the Senate.
Booker's office says his speech got more than 350 million likes on his TikTok stream. Former Vice President Kamala Harris wrote on X, "The true measure of a leader is not based on who you beat down, but on who you lift up." For over 24 hours, my friend Cory Booker stood on the floor of the Senate and lifted up the voices of the American people harmed by the current administration.
Here is political consultant Frank Luntz on News Nation last night.
Democrats are energized, but are they energized in running in a circle and fighting with each other, or are they energized in a direction?
They're going crazy right now. And they're going crazy because they don't see leadership in their own party. And I want to emphasize, what Cory Booker did over the last 24 hours may have changed the course of political history. That speech puts Cory Booker as one of the leaders for the Democratic Party, 2028, and I'll go even further. If you ask Democratic senators right now, would they rather have lead them over the next 3 years? They would choose Cory Booker over Chuck Schumer. That's how significant today was.
Meanwhile, former Senator Kyrsten Sinema took a shot at Booker, writing on X, "Maybe it," referring to the filibuster, "isn't an old Jim Crow relic after all." And podcaster Josie Glayback, known as the redheaded libertarian, wrote on X, "Rand Paul marathon filibustered the Patriot Act. Cory Booker marathon filibustered Orange Man bad." Senator Lisa Murkowski wrote, "Whether you agree with him or not, the past 24-plus hours was what most people think a filibuster actually looks like. Congratulations to Senator Booker for his historic feat while staying on his feet." How cute.
I thought it was fabulous. You know, when I first heard about it and first saw it, I thought, oh, these performative actions. But it wasn't just a performative action. First of all, what this man had to do with his own body to prepare himself, purposely dehydrate himself in order to do this, the physical exertion, and I think that it was a very inspiring move. I saw somebody say, but it didn't accomplish anything. It accomplished a lot. It inspired us on our side. It inspired us not only...
Weren't you already inspired?
Pardon?
Weren't you already inspired, Marianne?
Well, some of us were, but I think a lot of... We've been beaten down. You guys have been having a lot of wins recently, been coming at us really strong. We've been, we've been dispirited. And yesterday, between Susan Crawford winning in Wisconsin and what Cory Booker did, I agree with Frank Luntz. It's a new day. We're coming back, and on a very serious level. I agree with Frank Luntz, and I haven't always been a Cory Booker. I mean, I've liked him as a person, but I thought what he did was so strong, and he deserves all the kudos he's receiving. And I know that your side won't be particularly excited about it. As a matter of fact, I can see where your side would be pretty worried about it, because he gave a shot in the arm to every Democrat, and not just Democrats, but to look at the Lisa Murkowski comment, she's the Republican woman who I'm so proud of.
I'm not worried in the slightest
yes,
about it,
she's
but
standing up. It was a good
him.
night. Good night for us. Glory and kudos and all praise to Cory Booker. That's what I say.
Yeah, Cory Booker is far from my least favorite Democratic senator. In fact, he used to be one of my favorite Democratic senators, I would say. He used to have some policy ideas that were more independent-oriented or even libertarian-oriented, particularly on the education front, where he used to be a stronger supporter of school choice initiatives that people on my side of the aisle like. He did backpedal on a lot of that when that became a less popular stance to take. I mean, Barack Obama used to be a supporter of that as well. He got pulled, I think, leftward by the teachers union. So that's unfortunate, but he's a good speaker. He was one of the people in the Democratic Party slightly more willing to call out the fact that Joe Biden was like not in such good shape to run for re-election, along with Castro. So, you know, more power to him. I think he makes more sense as the leader of the party than he's displaying more energy than Chuck Schumer. But it's still all kind of vibes, and vibes are fine. You're entitled to your good vibes. I don't want to yuck your yum, but I don't think it matters all that much. And yeah. I have no like for Strom Thurmond, so I don't care that his record was broken. I will point out that people like Rand Paul, who we're going to interview today, have done a filibuster in favor of a specific issue, like not reauthorizing provisions of the Patriot Act that I think you and I probably very much agree on. And so I was happy to, so that should not be forgotten. But, you know, go off. Go off, King. I don't care.
Trump has given us so many issues to be against, and so we had an entire agenda to come after. You know, I appreciate that you would be trying to rain on our parade today, Robby.
I'm not really raining. I got a little tiny umbrella for you, so you don't get your hair wet.
All good today. All good today.
All right. Coming up next, new revelations about Hunter Biden's laptop. We'll ask Michael Shellenberger about them. Stay tuned. Well, you don't see this every day, but a federal judge did side with DOGE. U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell said he was not able to stop DOGE's takeover of the $500 million United States Institute of Peace building. Court documents say that DOGE took over the building for free. Howell says that DOGE had already transferred the building and the property inside of it on Saturday. As a result, the judge wrote on Tuesday, the deal is no longer merely proposed, but it's done, rendering plaintiffs' requested relief moot as to that property.
Outside General Counsel to the USIP, George Foote, criticized the judge's ruling. Foote wrote, "That's like letting a burglar break into your house, steal your TV, and have the court say, well, there's no TV to adjudicate, so I can't do anything about it. Congress created the United States Institute of Peace in 1984. It is a nonprofit that is dedicated to keeping peace abroad."
The Trump administration in March had fired most members of USIP's board. 5 of the fired board members sued some in the Trump administration. They filed suit against the Trump administration afterwards. Those former board members argued that USIP acts separately from the executive branch and is thus independent. They had filed an emergency motion Monday after seeing that DOGE had tried taking over the building on Saturday. Here's how it all went down. On March 25th, DOGE staffer Nate Kavanaugh was installed as the USIP president. Then he sent a letter to the acting administrator of the General Services Administration. That letter argued that transferring the USIP building was in the best interests of the USIP, the federal government, and the U.S. On Saturday, March 30th, the Office of Budget and Management approved the transfer, which didn't actually cost DOGE anything.
The drama had been building up for a while. After USIP board members were fired, agency staffers had banned DOGE employees from entering the building. This resulted in DOGE coming back with the D.C. police and a key they had taken from a former USIP contractor.
Now, to be sure, the judge's ruling doesn't mean that the transfer is permanent. The judge suggested that a larger ruling concerning whether the fired board member should be reinstated would determine if USIP gets the building back. That ruling is expected at the end of this month. So
this is the deal, Robby.
I like peace. Go ahead.
You do? Okay.
I love peace.
So there's
All
a
for
thing
peace.
called peace creation. You know, back in the old days, people didn't take care of their health. They didn't look into nutrition. They didn't look into exercise or lifestyle. Then if they got sick, they just hoped that they could take a medicine in order to eradicate the symptoms, okay? But we don't think that way anymore. We think in terms of creating health. We think in terms of nutrition. We think in terms of lifestyle. We think in terms of exercise and the things we can do to foster health. We need to be the same way with peace and war. things like the Institute of Peace actually help prevent violence. When there is greater peace in an area, through such things as humanitarian concerns, helping people have less desperate lives, this actually decreases the probability of violence and definitely decreases the possibility of war. So by getting rid of these soft powers, we are giving up on smart power. We are going full towards brute force, domination, hard power, and it's taken us decades to build a system where soft power and smart power is part of our foreign policy, and this, we are going to pay a terrible price for this, and we will be seeing this over the next few years.
I guess my rejoinder to that would be, has the time period where this agency existed been one that coincides with reductions in global tensions, with a pivot from harder to softer policy? Look, is the Biden administration a softer diplomacy, less military? I don't know. They funded Ukraine unlimited. Said they would have funded them to the end of time. Didn't push back on Netanyahu whatsoever. The world became a less stable, less peaceful place during the years of Biden, and Trump is trying to get that back on track.
Hold on. We were just reading. It was founded in 1984. That was a Republican president. This didn't used to be something that only Democrats believed in, trying to foster peace and diplomacy. So that's like saying, well, if you didn't get a certain disease, do we know that it's because you ate better? Do we know because you exercised better? Do we know that it's because of a healthier lifestyle? We can't know for sure, but there are all kinds of things that could happen that have not happened. And yes, it is absolutely logical and reasonable to assume that it's because of peace creation measures. These things are proven statistically. When you have greater education for women, when you have greater economic opportunities for women, when you have greater education for children, when you have an amelioration of unnecessary human despair, those are the kinds of things that these peace-building institutes and agencies take care of. Statistically, you have a lower incidence of violence and a greater probability of peace. Why would anyone get rid of that? Why would anyone think it's saving us money? No, it's going to cost us so much in the years to come.
It's not that complicated to have peace. You don't get involved in other countries militarily. You don't overthrow their leaders or foster coups within them. You establish favorable trade relations where we manufacture goods there, and that creates jobs for them. It starts out, they're not great jobs, but it's better than utter starvation, and then those countries develop and they get better economies, and then they end up with better rules for the treatment of people. But like that's how everything has progressed in the developing world, and it creates peace, and it creates all the things you're talking about, and then more opportunities for women, better treatment of children, all of that.
Who provides the opportunities for women? Who provides the economic opportunities for women? Who provides the educational opportunities for
industries.
Industry
businesses.
does not, though.
Yes,
Robbie,
it does.
Robbie,
What is an economic opportunity but a job?
I know you think the market takes care of everything.
The market literally provides what you just talked about.
In providing more education for children. That's the point. Children do not function in such a way yet as to increase an economic bottom line.
Education is publicly provided, but the market does provide economic opportunities for women. That is what an economic opportunity is.
Well,
right? I mean, that's what the market...
But in many cases, there have been barriers against women participating.
Legal barriers, not market barriers. Laws.
Yeah, yes and no, and no. My point is there's more to it than just thinking that market principles can be the governing principles and everything. Much of what you're talking about, it's a world here, there's a lot more beyond that, including the fact that many of these spaces we are now withholding funding for and withholding support for will be taken up by China, will be taken up by Russia, will be taken up by people in ways that we will be paying a price in the years to come. Market principles alone cannot...
I'm not saying market principles alone, but I don't want to underappreciate the role that markets and trade and having. Well,
I don't think that I underestimate, but I think
other people in
I would actually agree with that. I think that in general, I know it's a stereotype, it's a broad assertion, but I think in general the Republicans, act like the market is God, and in many cases the Democrats don't respect it enough. So I think there's a middle ground there, which is healthy. However, the idea of public spending on peace creation measures, including diplomacy, including the various kinds of programs that institutes like this do, getting rid of these things is insane. It's absurd. And it has nothing to do with serving the American people. And this, once again, it was founded by under a Republican administration, and for good reason. Ronald Reagan wasn't this stupid.
Well, I think we had some agreement today, Marianne.
Yes,
it was a more pleasant day in the chair. Next up, I'm really looking forward to this. We've got a great interview with Senator Rand Paul, who will talk about tariffs in the Department of Education. Trump came for him on Truth Social last night. We'll ask him to respond. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul had introduced a bill in March to abolish the Department of Education once and for all. The legislation intends to take big government out of schools and return control to the states and local communities.
His bill follows in President Trump's footsteps, who signed an executive order that directed Education Secretary Linda McMahon to facilitate the department's closure.
Paul may be in lockstep with Trump on education, but when it comes to tariffs, he's taken a slightly different policy. Last month, he did attempt to get his fellow senators to buck the agenda on tariffs, with Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, and Mitch McConnell of Kentucky now joining Paul in going against the tariff policy. Overnight, Trump responded, going on Truth Social, railing against the four, saying, quote, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and Rand Paul, also of Kentucky, will hopefully get on the Republican bandwagon. What is wrong with them other than suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, commonly known as TDS? Joining us now on this so-called Liberation Day is Senator Rand Paul. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Senator Paul, we enjoy having you on Rising quite frequently. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think you're someone who has Trump derangement syndrome. So why is it that you think this tariff policy is perhaps misguided or perhaps should not be the purview of the executive branch rather than Congress?
You know, on many fronts, I'm a supporter of the president. I'm a supporter of the president's looking for waste and abuse, cutting out, eliminating the Department of Education, et cetera. I like his cabinet. But on tariffs, I think it's just economically, it's a fallacy to think that it will help the country. Tariffs are a tax, and if you tax trade or if you tax anything, you'll get less of it. We know by looking at the history of the last at least 70 years or so in this country, that as international trade has increased, so has the prosperity of our country. Really, so has the prosperity of the entire world. About 100,000 people escape poverty every day as we speak. It's the most extraordinary thing that's happened in the history of mankind, and it's really from capitalism and from international trade. So the people who are for tariffs are just wrong. For example, with Canada, if you put a tax on things coming in and out of Canada, what you'll find is it just leads to higher prices for consumers. There are estimates that cars may increase in price by about $10,000. And then before we cast aspersions at Canada, we should understand that Canada buys more stuff from us than China, plus Japan, plus England, and plus Germany. So Canada buys more from us than we do from 4 large countries. So trade with Canada has made us prosperous and makes Canadians prosperous as well. It's a win-win situation. The other reason to be opposed to this, though, is the Constitution says taxes originate in Congress, and more specifically originate in the House of Representatives. This tariff or tax will originate with the signature of one person. That's not what our founding fathers wanted. They didn't want the executive to have any kind of power like the power to tax. They feared the power to tax, and that's why they gave it to the House of Representatives and to Congress.
Senator Paul, I certainly agree with you in your position about the tariffs. I have a couple of questions for you. Number one, other than the tweets of the president criticizing you, are you receiving a lot of pushback from your Republican colleagues for sort of daring to go out front on an issue where you're opposing the president's position? And my other question is, what do you think is the president's motivation? Certainly, he's hearing the argument of people like yourself and some of the greatest economists in the United States. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about what he's trying to achieve and what he thinks will happen from doing all this.
I think there's at least a dozen other Republican senators who are with me ideologically that free trade, that international trade is good for our country, but they're afraid to speak out because they're afraid of the president. But I'm not deranged by hatred. The president, I actually like him. I like him personally. I've played golf with him a dozen times. I have nothing but fond feelings for the president. Doesn't mean I have to always agree. I'm not a disciple. I'm not in a cult or anything. But I do appreciate, one, that he's taken this message across the country, that he's become president, and I'm for a lot of his stuff. But on tariffs, it's just an economic fallacy that they help us. They will hurt us. And there's a threat of them not only tanking the stock market, but there's a threat of them leading to a recession. And almost every economist will tell you they become an additional cost, which gets included in the price of items, which raises the price of things. So, the one thing Trump did actually that really has aided the economy from his first administration was the agreement between Mexico, the U.S., and Canada to lower trade barriers. So if we can get beyond the war part and get back to why don't we equally lower tariffs, then I'll be back on the bandwagon. It just has to be a policy or an argument that makes sense. And tariffs are taxes, and they make goods cost more. They're not good for our economy or the other countries' economies as well.
On an additional issue, you have an amendment to limit reckless spending that you would put forth to stop the U.S. budget from getting so out of control, stop a lot of bad government waste, and I think even bad government policy on the foreign policy front could be thwarted by the government actually having to spend within its means. Could you talk more about what you're proposing?
For years I've put forward budgets that balance within about 5 years, and I think that's what we should be doing. Right now, we're being promised that they're going to head in that direction. They're going to spend much less money next year. They're doing it through a budget process so they can pass and certify tax cuts, which I'm for, and make them permanent, which I'm also for. But in order to do this, they do it through a budget process, and they're promising to reduce spending. Well, I don't believe them, because the history of Washington and the history of both parties is never to restrain spending, and that's why we have $37 trillion in debt. The same bill that they want to keep the tax cuts and supposedly restrain spending, they want to raise the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. There's nothing conservative about that, and it belies their argument that they're going to cut spending. So I said one way to keep them honest is, why don't we give them 3 months worth of borrowing? Now, that's still an extraordinary amount of money. It'd be $500 billion. That would give them about 3 months. And they bemoan and say, oh, we don't want to vote on this all the time. We'd rather get $5 trillion so we don't have to vote on it for 2 more years, which means they're planning on borrowing about $2 trillion or more each year. But what I would say is, no, I'll give you 3 months. I'll vote for your bill. We'll put in place numbers that will reduce spending, continue the tax cuts, and narrow the deficit. But in 3 months, if you're not keeping your promise, then I won't vote to raise the debt ceiling again. See, I think the debt ceiling could be used as a voted on repetitively in order to breed restraint. And the one interesting thing that might come from this is Democrats might, for partisan reasons, decide, wow, we'd like another bite at the apple on debt ceiling too. We might just support his amendment. So we'll see what happens. My amendment will be germane. I think I'll get a few Republicans. But we'll see what the Democrats decide to do on this. But here's a chance where I think I could actually do something fiscally conservative and do it in a bipartisan way. We'll see what happens. It'll happen sometime this week.
Senator Paul, I appreciate you're one of those people who looks for a kind of bipartisanship that I actually like. I don't always like bipartisanship, but with you, you find some different issues that I think the American people have a lot of interest in. Thank you so much for coming on Rising once again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
That does it for us today on Rising. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can get podcasts. See you back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Now, the FBI says it never interfered in the 2020 election, but new reporting may reveal otherwise. Public Substack founder Michael Shellenberger, journalists Catherine Herridge and Alex Gutentag found that just days ahead of the election, the agency issued a gag order about the Hunter Biden laptop, effectively silencing any discussions about it. In 2024, the FBI supplied congressional investigators with a heavily redacted document containing those chats.
According to the report, an FBI official told House investigators that an agency employee accidentally confirmed the authenticity of Hunter's laptop to then Twitter. The New York Post published its bombshell story on the now infamous laptop the same day.
Joining us now to elaborate on the specifics of what they uncovered in the internal chats, the broader implication, is Michael Shellenberger, one of our favorite guests. Always nice to see you, Michael.
Good to see you, Robby.
So tell us more about why this is such a bombshell. It looks to me like proof that the FBI knew the Hunter Biden laptop story was genuine and said nothing about it, which matters because obviously there were those 50 intelligence and former intelligence officials who came forward to say, oh, well, it looks like Russian-based disinformation to us. Well, the government could have confirmed that it was not if the FBI had already reached that conclusion. And of course, the censorship, so much of it, of that story on social media, being motivated by what they were hearing from the FBI in the first place. So it's really a scandal if the FBI knew better. In fact, that would be, I guess, a disinformation campaign of their own.
Yeah, that's right. It was a disinformation campaign. So it's important for people to keep in mind that the FBI had the Hunter Biden laptop in December of 2019. They were able to authenticate it within days or hours of receiving it. That spring, then, we start to see Aspen Institute, the Stanford Cyber Policy Organization, start to basically pre-bunk or brainwash journalists and social media executives into associating Hunter Biden and Burisma with Russian disinformation. They claim that there's a coming hack and leak. Mark Zuckerberg said this to Joe Rogan in the summer of 2022. He apologized for it later. Basically, the FBI had gone to Twitter and Facebook in advance of the laptop story surfacing and said, hey, there's going to be some kind of hack and leak. It'll be about, Hunter Biden and Burisma. We now also have tied one of the people on that chats that we just reported on yesterday was the same FBI official who went and briefed Senators Grassley and Johnson, telling them that their Hunter Biden investigation was somehow being used for Russian disinformation. FBI then leaked that meeting to the media to basically spread disinformation. So you're exactly right, Robby. What we've seen here now is the FBI was involved in a very elaborate effort to kind of program journalists and social media companies in advance of the story coming out. Of course, mistakes get made. As you mentioned, one of the FBI employees accidentally told Twitter on a conference call that the laptop was real. Twitter went ahead and censored it anyway. And I think the important thing from all this, Robby, is not just is that censorship is very hard to achieve in a society like ours. What they're trying to do is to change the perception of it to make people think it's something that it's not, in this case, Russian disinformation.
What kind of accountability can we have for this behavior by the FBI? Now that the Trump administration controls the government, you'd think there'd be an effort to change this culture of corruption that is political. I keep having these arguments where they say, well, we don't want to politicize these agencies. I'm like, but there was a veneer of neutrality beforehand that very much served a specific political interest.
Yeah, look, I think we're all trying to give them a little bit of time at the FBI to kind of settle in. And obviously there's a lot going on. A lot of promises were made. I think we're all getting a little impatient. There is obviously a huge amount of information that hasn't been released. A lot of those documents were redacted that we reported on yesterday. A full investigation needs to occur. This was a very elaborate disinformation campaign, clearly aimed at changing the perception of the Hunter Biden laptop before it came out. It involved a huge number of people. So yeah, there's just a lot more here. And I think that obviously they've been focused on things like crime and migration and these deportations. But the weaponization of a government agency for political reasons is an extremely serious crime. And so, yeah, we're all getting a little bit impatient for it. We were glad to get this nugget, but I think there's just a lot more there that the public needs to know about.
And do we know, how Twitter received this news? Because I can't imagine from their perspective, Twitter is not a sole entity, right? It's a large number of moderators working often in tandem, often not on the same page, and senior vice presidents or legal people. Some of the staff of Twitter, we know at the high levels, had actually come from government or even from intelligence and maybe had a deference to those agencies that was improper. Other people were at least skeptical up to a point of the messaging they were getting from the government in terms of what are you talking about, these being Russian bots. We clearly know these are not Russian bots. I imagine, when whoever was in charge at the time finds out, wait, they told us, we took this story down, but they had already told us that the story was real. I had to imagine there was probably some frustration. Do we have any knowledge of internally how that was received?
Yeah, we do. This was the second Twitter file that I did. The first one I did was on the decision to deplatform Trump. The second one I did was on the Hunter Biden laptop. It was an amazing situation. Basically the head of trust and safety, the top censor in Twitter, in the early morning hours of when the New York Post story came out on October 14th, this person, Yoel Roth, said, "We don't see anything that violates any of our terms of service. There's no reason to do anything to this. It's fine." At that moment, the former FBI general counsel, who had become the Twitter deputy general counsel that summer, the previous summer, the very same time this information operation was underway, strenuously argued that it should be censored anyway. I produced all these documents. It's all online. This is all based on internal documents. Strenuously argued that it should still be censored, reversed the decision, even though there was still no information. There was just, all there was FBI disinformation, claiming some sort of role for Russians. There was nothing. It was made up whole cloth. People talk about sometimes, good disinformation is based on a nugget of truth. Zero in this case, zero, and there's no connection at all. And so they reversed it inside Twitter. And again, as I was saying, it was that decision because for a lot of people, including myself at the time, you heard about the story, but you also kind of heard, oh, it sounds like there's sort of something wrong with it. It's maybe related to Russians, and so we brought that skepticism into it. But there was nothing wrong with the story. It was exactly as it appeared, but we had all been manipulated into thinking it was something that it wasn't.
And I think the result of that, as you kind of just alluded to, is like we're still talking about this story. I don't know, however many years, it's years and years later now, if 4 or 5 years later. I think one of the reasons we're still talking about it is because of the dramatic efforts to censor it that appeared. I think it backfired totally, their desire to keep this out of the public commentary space. I think they Streisand affected this one 10,000 times over in terms of how much attention it ended up getting, which is maybe just an ideological lesson to people out there who want to engage in censorship.
Yeah, I mean, one small point on that, Robby, and this is a very good point. The Streisand effect is very real in all of the censorship. When you read all the documents by the people that were engaged in censorship and advocating more censorship, they're very aware of that. And so where they were headed, Robby, was at two big areas. They were looking to censor whole narratives, not just individual posts, because they understand that people think in stories. But then they were trying to really focus on deamplification, meaning they wouldn't actually, you would still be able to see it, but it just wouldn't go viral. That was where, like, the sort of the state of the art by the time it all blew open in the spring of 2022 with the Disinformation Governance Board at DHS, and then that December with the Twitter files. Where they were at was a level of sophistication that is quite jaw-dropping. I mean, it's so sophisticated. They were out there to basically control the information environment. They call them information operations, but they were looking to basically work with the social media companies on a constant basis to de-amplify narratives that they didn't like. So they we were far beyond just fact-checking or incitement of, I mean, we're so far beyond that. They're trying to change whole narratives by de-amplifying posts. I mean, it's Orwell couldn't have imagined it being that sophisticated. This is a level of subtlety and precision censorship that I think people don't associate, with that word.
Michael, if your goal is to make sure that censorship and any kind of manipulation of narrative is exposed, and I totally honor that. And if your story is, I have no reason to believe it's not true, good on you. I just hope that we will have the same kind of vigorous oversight of Kash Patel at the FBI, anything they do. I also think that even if that story was not Russian disinformation, as you say, that doesn't mean there wasn't Russian disinformation. It doesn't continue to be. And from our side of the aisle, there's no censorship. We've never seen censorship like this anti-DEI thing. Telling museums, telling cultural institutions, telling educational institutions what they can talk about, what they can't talk about, words themselves that are, taken out of documents. So I just hope that same level of vigor and vigorous oversight that you've exercised here will continue. But thank you for your work.
We would love to get into that more, but we unfortunately have to go right now. Michael Shellenberger, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, a district court's judge sides with DOGE. We'll tell you more. Stay tuned.